Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. Every now and then in the book of Joshua, we get introduced to a character whose life illustrates the kind of faith God is looking for in His people. They may seem few and far between, but they're there. And in Joshua chapter 14, verses 1 through 15, we meet Caleb. As Joshua and the Israelites prepare to divide up the land of Canaan, Caleb approaches Joshua about a promise made to him by Moses more than 40 years earlier. Caleb, along with Joshua, had been one of the original 12 men who had been sent by Moses to spy out the land of Canaan. He and Joshua had been the only two who had returned from the mission, who believed the land was not only abundantly fruitful, but conquerable. The other spies painted a bleak picture, describing the land as being filled with giants who were too strong for the Israelites to defeat. Rather than listen to Caleb and Joshua and trust God, the crowd had listened to the naysayers and refused to enter. But because of his faith in God, Caleb was promised his share in the inheritance. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had received their land on the eastern side of the Jordan, just as they had requested. Now it was time to divide up the land that had been promised by God to Abraham. And God had provided Moses with a very precise plan to follow, which Moses had then passed on to Joshua. This was not going to be a free-for-all, where each tribe asserted itself and grabbed whatever land it wanted. God had dictated a very specific methodology for determining the dividing up of the land of Canaan between the 12 tribes. There were now 9.5 tribes left and the entire land of Canaan to parcel out, and it was important that each received what God had ordained. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Among these the land shall be divided for inheritance according to the number of names. To a large tribe you shall give a large inheritance, and to a small tribe you shall give a small inheritance. Every tribe shall be given its inheritance in proportion to its list. But the land shall be divided by lot. According to the names of the tribes of their fathers they shall inherit. Their inheritance shall be divided according to lot between the larger and the smaller." Numbers 26, verses 52 through 56. God had commanded Moses to utilize the casting of lots to determine the exact location and size of each tribe's allotment. The casting of lots was a common practice among the people of God, and is mentioned some 70 times in the Old Testament. We're not exactly sure what the lots looked like or how they were used, and to our modern sensibilities, it would appear to be nothing short of a game of chance, like throwing dice. But the Jews had a different perspective. Yes, casting lots involved a degree of chance, but as the book of Proverbs makes clear, the sovereign will of God determined the outcome. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Proverbs 16, verse 33. What might appear to us as nothing more than luck was to the Hebrews a sign of God's will. They believed that when the lots were cast, God was behind how they fell. They were a means of determining the will of God when it had not yet been made known. This means for determining the boundaries of each tribe's inheritance provided a fair and reasonable outcome that prevented any show of favoritism on the part of Joshua. No one but God could know how the lots would fall. And the fact that all the tribes were willing to abide by the outcome determined by the lots reveals that they firmly believed God was behind it all. And before this process could be implemented, Joshua was approached by Caleb, a member of the tribe of Judah and one of the original 12 men who had spied out the land of Canaan 40 years earlier. Moses had sent Caleb and his 11 companions into the land in order to bring back a report concerning its natural resources and the military strength of its inhabitants. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "And go up into the hill country, and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land." Numbers 13, verses 17 through 20. And when the spies returned, they had brought good news and bad news. Yes, the land was abundant in fruit and rich in resources, but it was also filled with enemies who were too powerful for Israel to defeat. The spies painted a very bleak picture, causing the people of Israel to lose hope and to turn their backs on the promise of God. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Numbers 13, verses 32 through 33. But Caleb had spoken up, presenting a very different outcome. He didn't deny the presence of the enemy or attempt to underplay their strength. He simply encouraged the people to trust God. He believed that God had given them the land as an inheritance, and therefore God would give them victory over their enemies. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Numbers 13, verse 30. But the people didn't listen to Caleb. They went with a majority report and refused to enter the land. And God punished them for their lack of faith and their demonstration of unbelief in His promises. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, "How long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Say to them, As I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and all of your number, listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun." Numbers 14, verses 26 through 30. Here we learn that Joshua was also one of the 12 spies and had sided with Caleb in his positive report and recommendation to enter the land. These two men were the only two to survive God's purging of the people. And 40 years later, when the Israelites had finally entered the land, Joshua and Caleb were the only two from that previous generation who were still alive. Both were in their 80s, and now Caleb was asking for his portion of the land he had waited so long and patiently to receive. And it's interesting to note that Caleb requested the very land that his fellow spies had said was occupied by giants. Caleb wanted to live in the very land where the Anakim lived. He was asking for the most difficult tract of land occupied by the most formidable enemy, because he was sure that God would give him victory over them. "So now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said." Joshua 14, verse 12. And Joshua gladly honored Caleb's request, allotting to him and his people the land of Hebron, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Joshua 14, verse 14. And the author provides us with an important side note that states, the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. Joshua 14, verse 15. Caleb was given the city that belonged to the mightiest of all the descendants of Anak. Caleb would have to conquer the city of Hebron to make it his own. He would have to eliminate the Anakim in order to possess the land given to him by Joshua. And the text clearly indicates that he did. Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day. Joshua 14, verse 14. And the chapter ends with a statement that Caleb kept his promise to drive out the Anakim from the land. And the land had rest from war. Joshua 14, verse 15. Caleb provides us with an illustration of faithfulness in the face of overwhelming odds. Not only did he stand opposed to the words of his fellow spies, encouraging obedience to God when everyone else was recommending rebellion, he waited decades to receive the promise of God. He had endured 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and then 7 years of battle before he got the chance to enjoy his long-awaited inheritance. And even then, he had to fight to make it his own. But he did. God gave him victory because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel.